Well, thank you. It's so good to see Bob and Meme, old friends. Thank you for all that you're doing on this important effort, and thank you to all of you for the time today. Obviously, we're all here for the same reason, which is to defeat what is a really bad idea, a really bad piece of public policy. Proposition 16 brings back racial preferences. It brings back preferences that California voters, as the Assemblywoman noted earlier, California voters have spoken on this issue. In 1996, overwhelmingly, California decided we wanted to move toward becoming a more race-neutral, less race-conscious society, and so we passed Proposition 209 overwhelmingly in 1996. And primarily, the reason I wanted to join you today was to tell you a little bit about the evidence in terms of what's happened since we've had this period now of time when we haven't had preferences. What's been going on? A lot of people are arguing that the reason why we need to have preferences now is because we're not properly promoting diversity on our college campuses, the University of California system, the California State University system. The only problem with that argument is it's untrue. All of the data we have, and I've written a piece, as Bob noted, it appeared in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune. The same piece appeared in the Orange County Register and several other papers in Southern California over the weekend. The basic point of the piece was I was saying, look, just look at the numbers, look at the evidence. And the evidence is that at no point in history has the University of California been more diverse. We have more Latino students, more African American students, more Native American students, both getting into UC and matriculating, actually becoming students at UC, than when affirmative action was around. In fact, even if you look at it as a percentage of overall California high school graduates, those who are qualified to go on to UC and CSU, these so-called underrepresented minorities have actually done very, very well. So the idea that somehow we are not promoting diversity in public education in California, that simply is untrue. There is no evidence to support that. And that is why whenever you confront people who support Proposition 16 with this evidence and with this data, they don't have a good answer. They just say, well, it's not enough. I will tell you what the data tells us is that indeed these college campuses, these settings are more diverse today because we got rid of affirmative action 20 years ago. And now, for some reason, you've got all of these institutional interests in Sacramento who want to put racial preferences back into the equation. They want to divide us by race. They want to divide us by ethnicity. And I'm glad to see that this proposition is failing and failing miserably, because it's not only a bad piece of public policy, it's really a shameful effort to bring back something which will not help in any way solve some of the bigger problems California has. So I would encourage all of you to take a look at the arguments that I've put forward, the arguments that people who agree with me and those who believe that this is a wrong-headed effort. I hope you'll take a look at the piece and look at the evidence, and I hope you'll spread the news, because I find it appalling that people would ignore the reality of what the data is telling us. So, that's really the message I wanted to convey today, Bob and Meme. I'm happy. If there are any questions you guys have or want to discuss any issues any further, I'd be happy to do so.
Well, you talked about data. And one of our guests a few weeks back was Dr. Richard Sander, who works at UCLA, and you're probably familiar with him.
Yeah.
And he's a progressive, but on this issue, he lines up with us because his work demonstrated that, and I think you alluded to it in your article as well, that after Prop 209, they thought it would be squelching things, but lo and behold, not only was the admission rate, or I should say the enrollment rate, was higher, but those that graduated was higher too. And part of the conclusion he came to was there wasn't the stigma of being artificially planted into a cohort of people, and because everybody look at them and say, well, they're affirmative action person, they're not here by their merits. So talk a little bit about that if you could.
Yeah, sure. So Professor Sanders and others, the theory you're referring to is called mismatch theory. It's well articulated in the academic literature. There's been a number of different studies. It's controversial. There's no question about it. But the conclusion that a lot of the analysts have reached is that the reason why affirmative action is harmful, the reason why racial preferences are harmful, is because it places students in academic situations that they are mismatched for, hence the name mismatch theory. The idea is the reason that you admit academically qualified students to institutions that are more competitive is because you know they can handle the coursework when they get there. You know that they will be competitive and that in that environment they will be academically successful. They'll go on to graduate, get great jobs, have successful lives, etc. The challenge is what the academic research has found is that affirmative action has created situations where the individuals get into universities or they get into institutions that they're not well matched for. They don't have the academic preparation. They're not prepared. They get to those institutions and they end up doing poorly. They end up dropping out and they end up with worse outcomes than if they have gone to another institution where they were more well suited and better matched. So the academic research on this matter, I think, is quite clear. It is controversial, but it's clear that what you have to have is a situation where individuals are applying to and being admitted to institutions, to schools, where we know that they can succeed and are capable of succeeding. And indeed, it's not to say that people over the course of their lives can't improve and can't move into different kinds of institutions based on how they do, but that's the whole idea is you need to have an academic system that's based on merit, not preferences that are artificial in nature. Because the problem is when you put these artificial preferences onto people, they end up in situations where they're not well prepared to succeed. And that's the basic idea. And that's the problem with passing Proposition 16 is that you are placing people in a situation that, you know, may make some people feel better initially, but in the long run is really not great for their prospects in the economy. It's not great for their prospects in further graduate education, et cetera. So that's the problem with a policy like Proposition 16.
Well, you know, many that have been on his program have come to the conclusion that the reasons the California Teachers Association and others support Prop 16 so heavily is because we have failed miserably in the K-12 system, and we have a very unequal education there. I know the legislative analyst came out with a report done on 2018, I believe, that showed the different levels of preparedness with the Black population down at 21 or so percent and the Asian population 75% and the rest interspersed in between. Why do you think you've done some study on this, but even if you haven't, you can muse upon things. Why is there such a disparity in preparedness of our kids?
Well, you know, the K through 12 educational system in California is very inconsistent. In some parts of the state, it's very good. In other parts of the state, it's not as good. And there are significant differences. I'll say one thing, Bob, about this very difficult period with the COVID-19 pandemic that we've been through. And that is that actually it's made things worse. It's made things worse in so many areas where, you know, in fact, unfortunately, it's been these teachers' unions that have largely opposed efforts to bring students back into the classroom in person for in-person instruction. Even though we know we can do it safely, we know we can do it in a way that ensures proper respect for the health of teachers, which is very, very important. But the teachers' unions in a lot of major districts have actually blocked the effort to bring students back. That's just a small example. It's not a small example. It's actually a pretty big example. But it's an example of the way in which we are seeing public education in California. You know, the institutional interests I spoke about earlier, these teachers' unions, the leadership of these teachers' unions, a lot of the Sacramento bureaucrats that are up there now, many of whom I have to say, unfortunately, are Democrats, elected Democrats who've been there for too long. They don't have a really great sense, quite frankly, of what their policies are doing to harm students throughout this state. And that's the problem. You know, the public education system prepares some students very well, and it prepares others not well at all. And that inconsistency is something that we've got to stop. And one of the ways we can do that, by the way, is offering more choice to students at the local level. Things like charter schools, giving them the opportunity to go to schools that might suit their needs better. We shouldn't be opposing that. We shouldn't be trying to keep kids locked in schools that don't work for them. And that's one of the challenges we have in our state is that there's a tremendous amount of inconsistency. And you're right, that's one of the reasons why kids aren't prepared when they get to college. They're not prepared for college coursework, and we've got to look at reforming the system to be sure.
Well, you know, the author of ACA 5, which became Prop 16, was Dr. Shirley Weber. And I have a lot of respect for her because she does challenge the educational system. You know, and I don't know if you heard her floor on her speech on the assembly floor. She was basically saying that they brought this to her and really wanted her to carry it. And she didn't want to carry it for a lot of different reasons, but clearly she did. But, you know, every legislator has different areas that they have better bandwidth in. But the first time I heard her speak was she was talking about how, you know, the K-12 system is broken and unevenly educating students, and was basically trying to hold schools more accountable, something that typically is Republican. So maybe there's hope that somewhere in the future with her leadership, we can see some lights. But the teacher unions, the institutions are very powerful, and they collectively have their say. In fact, a lot of the people that are elected to the state assembly and state senate are former teachers that were teacher unions, or they were union leaders, you know, that get up there, and then not only are they protecting laws, but they're authoring them as well. Listen, I know you got to go. Mei has a comment or question real quickly.
Well, is it true that the pre-COVID-19 pandemic period, the teachers' unions were not receptive about educating kids online?
That's
right?
true.
They didn't want that at all. But
true.
now, you know, we're in a different period of time with the COVID-19 situation. All of a sudden, you know, they don't want the kids back in school. You know?
Right.
So I simply don't understand that. You know, if the key is to educate our kids, you know, why different attitude? You know, if online education is good now, why is it not good previously?
It's a great question. It's hypocrisy. That's the only answer. It's hypocrisy. It did not serve the interests of you know, many of these teachers unions. It didn't serve the interests before, and now it does. Now it helps to further their interests, and so they're for it. But they're only for certain kinds of online education. They're not universally for online education. So it's a big problem we have in our system. And you know, I'll just say, I think the effort that you all are part of to you know, get the facts out there about Prop 16, to get the facts out there about what our educational system is and isn't doing, is so critical and so important. I've just been absolutely, it's mind-boggling how little real evidence and data there is in this debate. And if you look at the evidence and look at the data, it is so plain and so clear to see that over the last 20 years, California higher education has done a great job of creating the kind of diversity, the kind of academic communities that we want. Why enter into this really polarizing debate now by solving a problem that doesn't exist? I just don't get it. And I really do hope that through your efforts and the efforts of others, Proposition 16 sees a resounding defeat.